one of the pioneers of the fascist movement in Italy and leader of the feared Blackshirts, who were the cornerstone of Benito Mussolini's regime. A world aviation pioneer, writer, shrewd politician, and enthusiast of violence, Italo Balbo was for a long time Mussolini's unofficial successor. Join us to learn about the extraordinary life of Italo Balbo, one of the founders and leaders of the Blackshirts. Italo Balbo was born on June 6, 1896 in Cortesana, a small suburb of Ferrara, which is a municipality in northern Italy. From a young age, Italo would get involved in his family's political discussions, which were, at their core, a reflection of the political situation in early 20th century Italy, where the coexistence between the monarchy and parliament was coming to an end and new forms of government were emerging, from republicanism to anarchism. In that environment, Italo developed a restless political temperament from a very young age. At the age of 15, Balbo was already involved in political uprisings, and by 18 he was already on the police's radar as, quote, a dangerous individual capable of organizing a coup d'etat. From a very young age, he also developed a love of aviation, with the organization of races and air shows. At the same time, towards the end of 1914, when Europe had already begun, due to his political temperament during World War I, he often visited the Il Popolo d'Italia newspaper office, a newspaper based in Milan, recently founded by a young former socialist and prominent leader named Benito Mussolini. There, Balbo joined the so-called Fasci of Revolutionary Action, which was the embryo of the upcoming Italian fascist movement. And he agrees with Mussolini that Italy's participation in the war would help prepare the ground necessary for an upcoming fascist-style social revolution. Therefore, through the newspaper, they support Italy's entry into the war. Italy does, in fact, enter the war in May 1915, and Balbo joins the Italian army in September 1916 as a recruit, later moving into aviation, where he performs remarkably. When the war ended in 1918 at the age of 22, he reached the rank of captain and received 2 silver medals and 1 bronze medal for military valor. After the war, Italy entered a deep crisis, with its economy devastated and political and social divisions eroding the nation's prestige. Between 1919 and 1920, the so-called Biennio Rosso took place. It was a period marked by massive strikes, factory occupations, and peasant unrest. In this uncertain climate, the middle classes and large landowners began to see Benito Mussolini's fascism as a force capable of restoring order. Fascism then proposed a third way between capitalism and socialism, a nationalist vision that would eliminate social discord and create the so-called corporatist state, where all social sectors, guided by national interests, would build the longed-for prosperity within the framework of that doctrine of patriotic exaltation. So in November 1921, Mussolini founded the National Fascist Party. For his part, Balbo returns to his hometown of Ferrara and there officially joins the Fascio. It is there that Italo Balbo's rise begins. With the position of political secretary of the Fascio of Ferrara, he begins to gain national prominence and makes a very good impression on Mussolini. The town of Ferrara becomes a testing ground for the so-called action squads, groups of armed pro-fascist youths. Many of them, like the entire fascist movement, are veterans of the First World War. This was the case with Italo Balbo, who imposed military discipline, a hierarchical structure, and turned the political squads into a coordinated and violent action force, if necessary. They gained ground in official political institutions, also controlling unions, but they openly embraced violence as a method of political struggle. At that time, under the direction of Balbo, they set fire to socialist movement offices, intimidated employers, and harassed those they considered enemies of the nation. Balbo achieved all of that by forcing everyone to fall in line with him. Fascism? Italo Balbo was the one who introduced the characteristic black uniform of the famous Italian Blackshirts, chosen for its simplicity and visual impact. This gave rise to what would become an entire army of the fascist movement, with Italo Balbo as its leader in 1922. Political violence intensified throughout Italy, and the government's inability to stop it paved the way for the fascists to seize power. In this way, Mussolini rose as the supreme leader of Italy, while Balbo became the supreme leader of the Blackshirts. He was also one of the 4 leaders who formed the so-called Quadriumvirate, which was dedicated to planning and militarily executing the famous March on Rome, where nearly 25,000 Italians from all over mobilized toward the capital as a means of pressuring the then King Victor Emmanuel to finally give in, appointing Benito Mussolini as Prime Minister of Italy. This event was made official on October 31, 1922. Shortly after, on February 1, 1923, Balbo was appointed as the General Commander of the so-called Voluntary Militia for National Security. This officially legalized and uniformed the Blackshirts, making them the backbone of the new Italian fascist state. Mussolini governed his first years with Balbo as the head of the Blackshirts, dedicated to intimidating enemy politicians and parliament when necessary, and to controlling the political opposition. However, the Italian political class urged Mussolini to respect public freedoms and democracy. Fascism had a national project that openly sought to infiltrate all of the nation's institutions. The tension peaks in June 1924 when Socialist Deputy Giacomo Matteotti is murdered on Italo Balbo's orders. The crime causes a national shock and triggers a deep political crisis. For the first time since the March on Rome, Mussolini's power wavered and even the fascists cornered him. On December 31, 1924, several territorial leaders of the Blackshirts, including Italo Balbo, their supreme chief, demanded that Mussolini strengthen his authority in Italy. Otherwise, he would lose the support of the militia, which was the main force that sustained the regime. A few days later, on January 3, 1925, Mussolini reaffirmed his commitment to the fascist national project and declared his intention to eliminate the old Italian parties, to transform the institutions and create a new civil and legal order based on the fascist vision. This declaration marked the transition toward a fascist dictatorship in the Roman sense of the word, which would be established and consolidated in Italy. Italo Balbo was essential throughout this process. He had brought Mussolini to power in 1922 and in critical moments managed to support him, strengthening his position through the Blackshirts. As the leader of the Blackshirts, Balbo would embody the quintessential fascist revolutionary. He was a natural leader who combined propaganda, politics, language, and the seduction of the masses. Someone who organized spectacles and political maneuvers, and at the same time combined all of that with violence and the use of force. According to several historians, without his energy, discipline, and will to act, the consolidation of Mussolini would hardly have been possible. Balbo is, in many ways, the operational force behind fascist power. However, once the regime was established, similar to what happened to Ernest Röhm in National Socialist Germany, his figure began to be pushed to the margins. His presence could be uncomfortable in a regime that sought to become official and institutionalized. He began to lose the trust of several fascist leaders and of the movement he himself helped to build. The regime and the entire movement were becoming increasingly centralized around the figure of the Duce Mussolini. So eventually, Italo Balbo was removed from the leadership of the Blackshirts. And in October 1925, Mussolini appointed him Undersecretary of National Economy, a minor position within the government that served to relegate Balbo to a secondary role and isolate him. Balbo distanced himself from the regime for a time and even criticized it for abandoning its old principles. But to his relief and great joy, on November 6, 1926, Mussolini decided to appoint Italo Balbo as Undersecretary of Aeronautics. It was a much more attractive position for him, and Mussolini chose him because he saw in him the energy needed to turn Italian aviation into the modern weapon of fascism. Balbo quickly assumed control of civil and military aviation, working to transform the country's image from the sky. During the following years, first as Undersecretary and then as Minister of Aeronautics, Balbo became the true architect of the Italian Air Force. The position brings together everything that defines his character: politics, adventure, public glory, patriotism, and military spirit. Balbo has a modern understanding of aviation. He often repeats, quote, "The future of Italy is in the sky," convinced that flying should not be the privilege of a few heroes, but a daily practice for ordinary citizens that would connect the entire nation. To achieve this, he reorganizes the structure of aeronautics from scratch, intensifies the development of the military force, multiplies civil air routes, promotes air tourism, and creates what is called aviation awareness among Italians. He dedicates himself to expanding airports, finances the aeronautical industry with generous subsidies, and turns Italy into an exporter of aircraft. Under his command, aviation becomes a symbol of modernity and national strength. His fame, however, literally soars through the skies with the great air journeys that he personally leads. Between 1928 and 1929, he organizes massive flights across the Mediterranean. In 1930, he crosses the South Atlantic to Brazil, and in 1933, he leads the famous Cruise of the Decade, a formation of 25 seaplanes that crosses the North Atlantic to Chicago and New York. This last feat becomes a worldwide event. The United States welcomes him as a modern hero. The New York Times celebrates him as the commander of the greatest group flight in history, and Chicago declares July 15 as Italo Balbo Day. Even a main street is renamed Balbo Avenue. But his departure from the ministry will come abruptly in October 1933. The same propaganda machine that had turned him into a national hero would end up consuming him. Mussolini, distrustful and jealous of his popularity and of the influence he still had over the Blackshirts, decided to dismiss him and assign him a new post. He tells him that the position of Governor General of Libya suits his rank and career better. Balbo understands the message instantly. For him, it wasn't a promotion but political exile, or at least being sidelined from power.
Del centro de poder.
Despite his frustration and his adventurous, revolutionary spirit, Balbo's loyalty and affection for Benito Mussolini prevailed, as did his loyalty to the movement. So he accepted the decision, even knowing that his future in the regime was no longer in the skies, but on the fringes of what was then the Italian Empire. Italo Balbo thus assumed the position of Governor General of Libya in January 1934, a territory that at that time was part of the Italian Empire. His mission is clear: to transform Libya into a natural extension of Italy, the so-called Fourth Shore. In December 1934, he carried out one of his first strategic moves, the formal unification of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica under the name of Libya. At the same time, he promoted the rapid modernization of Tripoli, which was the capital, building avenues, public buildings, and an urban aesthetic designed to showcase the triumph of Italian colonialism. His most emblematic work is the Libyan Coastal Road, a road of almost 2,000 kilometers that runs along the entire coast. Built between 1934 and 1937, this project doubled the country's paved road network and became a symbol of the fascist regime's civilizing project. Balbo also pushes mass colonization. In October 1938, he organizes the so-called March of the 20,000, a massive relocation of Italian settlers who land in Libya, with the goal of settling 100,000 colonists before 1944 and turning the coastal provinces into fully recognized metropolitan territory. The event is a demonstration of military precision and political propaganda designed to amaze Italy and the whole world. And he will also win the favor of the Arabs in the region by closing concentration camps, rebuilding mosques, respecting Muslim holidays, and even attempting, though unsuccessfully, to grant citizenship to the Libyans. Paradoxically, while ruling Libya with an iron fist, Balbo was becoming the only major fascist leader who openly opposed what was happening with the regime. Balbo was deeply anti-German since the First World War. This included National Socialism, and he even met Hitler in 1932, but he was not impressed by him at all. Balbo would oppose the rapprochement between Fascist Italy and National Socialist Germany after the Ethiopian War, and in 1938, he attacked the Rome-Berlin axis during the sessions of Italy's Grand Council of State. That same year, he openly expressed his strong rejection of the German racial laws, which were imported and applied in Italy due to its alliance with the National Socialists. The exclusion of the children of his Jewish friend, Renzo Ravenna, was intolerable to him, and he protested publicly and loudly, walking arm in arm with him down the main street of Ferrara. This was a bold stance, directly challenging fascist regulations as World War II approached. He insists that Italy should not enter the conflict against powers that were far superior to it. As fascism continues to deteriorate, according to him, Balbo places more and more hope in the monarchy as a possible check on Mussolini. He grows more favorable toward the royal family, builds relationships, and openly suggests shifting alliance to France and Great Britain. In the last session of the Grand Council of State in which he participated, in December 1939, when the World War had already broken out in Europe. Although the war had already started after the Soviet and German invasion of Poland in September 1939, Italy would not immediately enter the conflict, but instead remained in a period of non-belligerence, a period in which many voices urged Mussolini not to enter that war. Italo Balbo supports the decision with absolute conviction to remain neutral. For him, entering a conflict of unpredictable dimensions would be a national catastrophe. In February 1940, he issued a prophetic warning. If Italy enters the war on Germany's side, he said, "We will be defeated, fascism will fall, the monarchy will fall, we will lose the colonies, and we can consider ourselves lucky if Italian unity is preserved." Words that proved to be very accurate when looking at Italy's fate after World War II. During the so-called non-belligerence, Italo Balbo emerged as one of the most prominent voices in the country for Italian neutrality in the conflict. And taking advantage of his position in the regime, he actively campaigned against the war. On one occasion, a friend points out the streetlights on a street to him. "They will see all of us hanging from those streetlights." Another prophetic vision, without knowing it, of what would be the fate of Duce Mussolini, whose body, after his execution in 1945, was hung from the canopy of a gas station. But finally, ignoring the multiple warnings, including those from Balbo, who told him firsthand about Italy's military and technical impossibility to successfully fight the war, Mussolini ended up declaring war on June 10, 1940. Balbo, still a loyal soldier to Benito Mussolini, is appointed as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of North Africa. Mussolini's orders for Libya were strictly defensive, fearing that Balbo, known for his offensive spirit, would launch reckless operations. And in fact, Balbo would insist that defense was doomed to fail and proposed an immediate attack on Egypt, which Marshal Badoglio rejected time and again. Inevitably, Balbo heads to the front with his characteristic style, trying to move his headquarters to Cyrene and making daily flights to the most advanced positions. A week before his death, he performs one of his last reckless acts. After spotting a damaged British armored vehicle from the air, he hastily organizes a small force and manages to capture the vehicle. A small but very symbolic act, as it was more typical of the old leader of the Blackshirts than of the commander-in-chief of a lost war. But it is on June 28, 1940, when tragedy strikes the town of Tobruk. At 5:30 in the afternoon, Italo Balbo approaches the Italian airbase in a small plane, shaken by a recent enemy attack. But he is hit by an Italian projectile when his small plane is mistaken for an enemy aircraft. Though there were suspicions of a plot, the internal investigation found it was a grave mistake that cost the life of one of the era's most famous Italians. Mussolini reacts with inexplicable coldness. He publicly denies the incident, claiming that Balbo had crashed, and simply appoints his successor in Libya. Only the Royal Air Force pays tribute the next day, dropping a wreath at an Italian air base with a message calling Balbo a great leader and brave aviator. The writer Ardingo Soffici publicly laments the death of, quote, one of the few truly free men of fascism. His death at only 44 years old eliminates Mussolini's only potential rival and forever ends the career of the most charismatic, contradictory, and rebellious of the founders of Italian fascism, who also predicted the future of the fascist regime he himself built. which would end in 1945 with the American occupation of Italy, the fall of fascism and of the monarchy. Thank you all very much for watching this video. Please remember that you can really support us by leaving your comments, liking the video, subscribing to the channel, sharing the video with all your friends, and clicking the bell to activate notifications. This was Reynaldo Jose Carrillo Vilches speaking to you. This is La Nueva Enciclopedia. As always, we thank you for all your support and many blessings to everyone.